Number one LSU in the national championship game thanks to a record-destroying performance by Joe Burrow. The Heisman-winning quarterback had one of the most impressive halves in college football history, and in the college football playoff, no less. 7 touchdown passes in the first half against what was the best defense the Big 12 had to offer. 8 touchdowns accounted for in all. He added a rushing touchdown early in the third, and that was it for him. Those 8 touchdowns, the most by any person in any bowl game ever. I'm Chris Hassel. I watched it on TV. These other 2 guys, they got to see it in person. Barrett Sallee and Chip Patterson watched from the field in Atlanta. What was that like, Barrett? I'll start with you.
It was almost comical. I mean, LSU, the way this offense has progressed, and it's crazy to think that it has progressed, but it has. From game 1 through game 14, it's gone from great to just unbelievably extraordinary. It was like watching a guy who created a bunch of 99 players on a video game beat up a 6-year-old on rookie mode on the video game. I mean, it was just unreal. Joe Burrow is an absolute machine, and the completion percentage is unbelievable. But to think that he does it in this offense with those kind of receivers and that kind of scheme that thrives off deep downfield passes, I mean, man, just when you think he can't be better, he goes and does something like this. And like I said, Chip and I were up in the press box and down on the field just kind of laughing because it was just, it was so just amusing how good that he was.
Listen, Joe Burrow said after the game, we expect to score a touchdown every single time we get the ball. And that's not just a little bit of coach speak or football speak from the son of a football coach. That is truly the confidence that this LSU offense has right now. And so in that way, it was almost remarkable how unremarkable LSU's team was treating it after touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. There wasn't any crazy celebration on the sidelines, and no one was really taking any time to be in awe of what Joe Burrow and those LSU wide receivers were doing, because really, I mean, it is not football speak. Every single time Joe Burrow gets the ball in his hands, he is thinking touchdown. And sitting there in the building in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, every single time LSU got the ball, I was thinking touchdown. So I wasn't even surprised, even as the records were falling one by one.
Chip, Barrett, hang tight as we flip the script to the team that LSU is going to be playing in the national championship game, the defending champion Clemson Tigers. And what an exciting semifinal this was between Trevor Lawrence and the Clemson Tigers and Ohio State, 2 unbeatens. Maybe the most exciting semifinal game we've ever had. Trevor Lawrence needed to do something he had never done before, lead his team from behind. Fell behind 16-0, led the game-winning drive, also led the team in rushing. 107 yards on the ground, a 67-yard touchdown run when he outran the entire Ohio State secondary. Very impressive stuff from Trevor Lawrence. Let's welcome back in Barrett Sallee and Chip Patterson. And Barrett, I'll start with you. How much do you think LSU should be worried about this newfound running ability for Trevor Lawrence?
Very worried, because what we've seen from LSU is in the past, they have been susceptible to running quarterbacks. Now, not necessarily in the semifinal, but that was because they put Jalen Hurts in so much of a hole that he really couldn't. The game plan sort of shifted. But what did we see against Ole Miss? We saw John Rice Plumlee run for years and years and light years. John Rice Plumlee is probably going to run right behind me. He ran so much against that LSU defense. So, yeah, if you're Clemson, you have to look at Trevor Lawrence and say, okay, what from that can we take? And I think they can take an awful lot. So, yeah, LSU should be concerned. Look, I'm honestly surprised that this hasn't been part of Clemson's game plan before, because Trevor Lawrence in high school, and he was right up the road from me in Cartersville, he can run. He's been doing this in high school a lot, and we've heard Dabo Swinney consistently say, yeah, that's in his repertoire. We haven't had to see it, but I think he saw against Ohio State that maybe they will over-pursue and they will sell out to stop ETN. So that was the time to unleash the legs of Trevor Lawrence. It was the right time. It was the perfect game plan. And I expect to see more of it against LSU, because we know LSU at times this year, they have been susceptible to running quarterbacks.
Right, and LSU should be very, very concerned about Trevor Lawrence running the ball, because what it does to the math. And you're absolutely right. What we saw Ohio State's defense do is they said, we are not going to let Travis Etienne, one of the real keys and heartbeats to this offense for the last 2 years, we are not going to let him beat us. We're going to try to stop him. And that's what allowed Lawrence to be the team's leading rusher. So what happens now when you have to be more concerned about Trevor Lawrence as a rushing threat? That means less bodies, less attention, less eyes on Travis Etienne. And look, Travis Etienne, Louisiana native, 4-star who did not go to LSU, went to Clemson instead, playing back in Louisiana. We talk about LSU and all the home field cooking that they're going to get playing there. But how about Travis Etienne as just a really interesting story? Listen, Ohio State sold out there and Lawrence beat them. So now LSU is going to have to worry about Lawrence and also, oh yeah, Travis Etienne.
In this matchup, we're going to have Trevor Lawrence, the likely #1 pick in 2021, against Joe Burrow, the Heisman Trophy winner and likely #1 pick in 2020. Who has the edge at quarterback? Barrett, I'll start with you.
I'm going to say Clemson, and that's crazy to think because Joe Burrow has been so awesome, and we know what he's done, the Heisman Trophy and the completion percentage and all that. But Trevor Lawrence has been here. Trevor Lawrence has not lost a game as a starting quarterback through 2 years. He's won it as an underdog. He's won it with the target on his back, and now they're underdogs again. So everything that Trevor Lawrence has been through suggests to me that he's up for this kind of game. I don't necessarily think Joe Burrow, you can say anything different, but it is a little bit less known right now. So what we're talking about here is choosing between $75 steaks at an incredibly nice steakhouse. You open the menu, you put your finger down on the steakhouse, on the steak list, and you're gonna get a good piece of meat. You're gonna get a good dinner. It just depends on taste. And for me, I'll take the one that has been through this before. I'll take the quarterback that has been through the ringer. He understands what needs to be done in a national championship game. So it's Trevor Lawrence. But again, I'll take both of these guys on my team any day of the week.
Advantage LSU. And I agree with Barrett on the general principle. These are just two exquisite top-level quarterbacks. These are two quarterbacks, as you mentioned, Chris, that are going to be right at the top of their respective NFL draft classes. But I'm picking this for one game, and I'm picking this for the national championship at the end of an absolutely historic season. I just think Joe Burrow's in a little bit of a groove. And while Trevor Lawrence has done a great job of all the statistics that he had in that Ohio State game, what did we see? Zero besides the interceptions, continuing that interception-free streak that he really clicked into in the second half of the season after throwing a whole bunch of picks at the beginning of the year. So I understand that Trevor Lawrence, maybe in the eyes of an NFL draft scout, gets the edge. But if we're just picking for this contest and this game, give me the grown man in the middle, or excuse me, at the conclusion of one of the best heaters that we have seen in all of college football history. Give me Joe Burrow.
Okay, so you guys are differing on the quarterback, though we know it's a razor-thin margin. These two guys, just incredible. All right, how about the Clemson pass catchers going up against a defensive unit that calls themselves DBU, Defensive Back University, and LSU, Barrett?
I can't wait to see this because LSU's defensive backs. I mean, Derek Stingley, that kid came onto campus and was the starting cornerback at DBU this year. That's how good he is. But you put him up against T. Higgins, Justin Ross, Amari Rodgers, DeAndre Overton, who nobody talks about. This is the biggest test they'll have. So I think for LSU and for Dave Aranda, they love to play man. They absolutely play man consistently. So in this situation, do you trust them against these Clemson receivers? And the thing about them is that they're tall. They're oversized. And so if you have the DBs that can go up and get it and turn 50-50 balls into 75-25 balls in their favor, then you have a chance. And LSU's got a chance. They've got those bodies. And those guys are dudes. They're dogs outside. They will stick you at the line of scrimmage and knock you off your route. So I think what they're going to have to do is that they're going to have to let Grant Delpit be a free safety, play a lot of cover one over the top, and let Grant Delpit be that guy that sort of is the eraser. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see. I think that they have the weapons to slow down Clemson's wide receivers, but man, it's their toughest test. There's no doubt.
So if I'm going to zero in on one aspect of this matchup, the thing that's going to be interesting to me is open field tackling, because as Trevor Lawrence has cleaned up his passing game a little bit, he's not throwing as many interceptions. he's not throwing as many 50-50 balls where he's relying on a Justin Ross or a T. Higgins to go up there and make a play against a smaller defender. A lot of the way the Clemson offense has been working, especially when they're going up against an elite secondary, like what they had in Jeff Okudah and the Ohio State secondary, they're trying to make easy throws and then give those big-bodied receivers a chance. So that is where you can't take bad angles, you can't over pursue, you can't try and jump a route necessarily, because they have breakaway speed and they can turn a 12-yard passing play into a 72-yard passing play really, really quickly. So here for LSU, it's going to be important in coverage. It's going to be important in man coverage especially, but I'm also looking at how they're going to do with those open field tackles, because one missed tackle or one time playing too aggressive, and you could give up a touchdown against these Clemson playmakers.
All right, let's flip it now. You got LSU averaging the most points per game this season in college football against a Clemson defense giving up the fewest amount of points in college football. Barrett, how can Clemson contain the LSU pass catchers?
I think the biggest thing first is they've got to get in the backfield and affect Joe Burrow, because Clemson, like LSU, likes to play a bunch of man too. So they're going to have their backs to the football, and we've seen LSU's receivers time and time again when they get downfield deep, they are on the same page with Joe Burrow. So they will find their way to where Joe's going to put the football. So I think the biggest thing for Clemson, first and foremost, is to get pressure, especially pressure with 4. Bring another guy and bring 5 if you have to. But I think you have to trust that secondary too. I mean, look, these guys are veterans. Right? I mean, A.J. Terrell's been there forever. Nolan Turner's a reserve, essentially, plays in a bunch of nickel. He had the game-sealing interception. You've got Kayvon Wallace and Tanner Muse. They are veterans at this. They know what to expect. But do they have the size to contend with some of these guys? Probably not. So I think it's on Brent Venables and the rest of that defensive staff to figure out how to get pressure, how to move Isaiah Simmons around, and confuse that Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line for LSU. If they can do that, then they're going to have a chance, because no one's really slowed down LSU yet, but Clemson's got the dudes up front to make it happen.
Yeah, this is a problem for Clemson. This is one of the biggest mismatches as I break down on a position group by position group basis. When I think of Clemson and LSU's wide receivers against Clemson's defensive backs is the LSU Tigers' greatest advantage in this game. And that's one of those things that, Chris, we love college basketball. And when I look at this matchup, it's like the Power 5-star Kentucky team against the tryhards from Evansville. And every now and then, Evansville might win that game, but we don't expect them to win that game. And so you've got to look at Tanner Muse, and you've got to think that somebody who was a little bit overlooked in recruiting, someone who came and didn't really look like he was going to be one of those freaks out there, but has developed into a stellar player, he's got to live up to being someone who makes up for some athletic shortcomings with elite decision making. I'm very curious, as Barrett mentioned, what we're going to do with Isaiah Simmons. I thought the adjustment to move him playing deep safety against Ohio State in the second half, I thought it was one of the best coaching moves of the college football playoff semifinals. And I wonder if that is put in place again, because it prevents the long run from Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and it allows Simmons to play instinctually to try and read Joe Burrow as well as you can and go to make a play on the ball. So Isaiah Simmons is a big key, listed as a linebacker, but we could see him drop back in the defensive backfield, especially because I think LSU's wide receivers big advantage against Clemson's defensive back.
Let's set aside the players for a moment and talk coaches. And I'm not talking head coaches here, not talking Ed Orgeron or Dabo Swinney. Let's talk the 2 highest paid assistant coaches in college football, Dave Aranda and, of course, Brent Venables, who seems like every year we're talking about him maybe taking on a head coaching job. But, Chip, how important are these assistant coaches going to be when you have 2 weeks and 2 days to prepare for a game?
Oh, massively important. First, with Dave Aranda, that was one of the first things that Ed Orgeron said after the game. He said, I was very confident in our defense. I respected Jalen Hurts, respected Oklahoma's offense, but I really thought that Coach Aranda had a really good plan. Our guys felt prepared, and they came into the game with confidence. They came into the game chippy. They came into the game with a little bit of swagger, and they imposed their will with those 3 and outs early in the first quarter that did as much to set the tone for that game as Joe Burrow's touchdown passes. So massive for Dave Aranda. And then for Brent Venables, at the end of that game, where does Dabo Swinney go first? He goes to hug his defensive coordinator, Brent Venables, who just spends hours on hours on hours just drawing up any kind of scenario that he thinks the offense is going to have and then trying to come up with a new tricky scheme. I mean, the battles that are going to go on within this game as those coordinators try to figure out ways to stop the opposing offenses, it's going to be fascinating. And I really think if we're comparing the two, this is going to be advantage Clemson, advantage Brent Venables, because I do think he doesn't have as much of that raw talent. He doesn't have 3 first-round NFL draft picks on the defensive line. He doesn't quite have the tools that Dave Aranda has for LSU, yet I still think he's able to get even better results. And so advantage Clemson a little bit, but certainly a fascinating way to look at this game through the eyes of both defensive coordinators.
We are going to continue to preview the national championship game on the other side of this quick timeout, including X factors for each team. And we've got picks. Not everyone in agreement with who's going to come out on top, or are they? We'll find out after this. I'm Chris Hassel, continuing to preview the national championship game. Monday, January the 13th in New Orleans, LSU playing a virtual home game in their home state against the defending champion Clemson Tigers. Let's take a look at the matchup with LSU, the favorite, over-under just under 70 at this point, though Clemson is looking for its 30th consecutive win. Let's bring back Barrett Sallee and Chip Patterson for some picks and an X factor for each one of these teams. Before we get the picks, before we get the X factor for LSU, Barrett, why don't you start by giving us the X factor for Clemson?
It's defensive coordinator Brent Venables, the guy who should have had a head coaching job about a decade ago, is still in Clemson. He's getting paid boatloads of money to replace star after star after star. And now, because of the way the calendar works out, he's got 2 weeks to try to stop this LSU offense. Brent Venables will look at this as one of the best challenges and the biggest challenges of his entire career. And for me, I know that Brent Venables will come up with a game plan that he feels will be effective. He loves to bring pressure. He loves to be creative with how he brings that pressure. So the X factor for me is this defensive coordinator for Brent Venables with these kind of pieces on to the puzzle with 2 weeks to prepare. Because if you're LSU, you really wanted that calendar to be like it was 2 years ago when you only had a week between the semifinals and the national championship game. Because he's got 2 weeks, expect Brent Venables to dial up something fun.
Let's keep it with Clemson because my X factor is going to be Isaiah Simmons. Simmons has been Clemson's best defender for the entire season, and he's really been one of the best defenders in the entire country. And what did we see against Ohio State when the game was on the line? Simmons was out there, and he came up with a huge interception that allowed the Tigers to be able to hold on for that win. He's great at rushing the passer. He's great at open field tackling, and he's fantastic at also tapping back into those instincts that come from being a safety in high school. He plays at all 3 levels, and he is a difference maker at all 3 levels. So when you play against the best offense maybe that we've seen this decade or ever in college football history, you need your best defender to step up and have game-changing plays. So Simmons has got to do it. He did it against Ohio State, but he's going to have to do it again for Clemson to win a national championship.
Both X factors coming from the defensive side of the ball for Clemson, a team that was #1 in the nation in points allowed. How about an X factor for the LSU Tigers? And no, you cannot pick Joe Burrow. You cannot pick the Heisman Trophy winner. It's got to be somebody else. Barrett, start with you.
Oh, come on. I can't pick Burrow now. But in all seriousness, it's Grant Delpit, the Jim Thorpe Award winner at safety. To be honest with you, has not had his best season. He was better last year, and I'm quite honestly surprised that he won the Jim Thorpe Award. But we know what he's capable of. He's battled through injuries this year. And what LSU does defensively, they're going to put Derek Stingley, they're going to put Christian Fulton on islands against those Clemson wide receivers. So you're going to have Grant Delpit over the top to help out whichever way Trevor Lawrence is going. But on top of that, you know what Clemson likes to do. They like to have that eye candy behind the line of scrimmage. They love to have Travis Etienne get out in open space. So Grant Delpit's going to have to be the guy, open field tackling, understanding assignments, eye discipline, help out over the top. It's going to fall on the Jim Thorpe Award winner, Grant Delpit. If he has a big game, then LSU is going to win the national championship.
Give me Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And, we spent so much time going into the semifinal wondering whether or not he would play. Barrett and I were down there on the field trying to see if he would come out of the tunnel. and all of a sudden, there he was on the very first drive of the game, laying a brutal block to an oncoming Oklahoma defender in pass protection on what would lead to the first touchdown of the game. And then he rips off a 14-yard run on what would lead to the second touchdown of the game. He did have that hit that he took on the targeting play that led to an Oklahoma ejection, and then he didn't come back on the field because, Coach O thought it was going to be in an emergency situation only, and by that time, there were no emergencies for LSU. So, after undergoing 6 to 8 hours of treatment in the week leading up to that game to get that hamstring ready, is he going to be 100% for this national championship game? And if so, what does Clyde Edwards-Helaire, a full 100% Clyde Edwards-Helaire, do for LSU's offense after we just saw them put together tons of tape of how they can beat teams without him? Now you insert that dynamic two-way rushing, receiving threat into LSU's offense, and goodness, Brent Venables' job is even tougher, even with the 2 weeks to prepare.
Those are your X factors, and as Chip mentioned, you guys were both there to witness LSU and Joe Burrow dismantle Oklahoma in Atlanta. This game being played in Louisiana, in New Orleans, where LSU has won national championships before, their last one coming in 2007. Let's get picks from both of you. Chip, I'll let you lead us off on this one.
Give me the Clemson Tigers. Give me the Clemson Tigers with the points. Give me the Clemson Tigers straight up. So maybe we'll be playing with that money line sprinkle out there. I really think they've been the best team in football for basically the last 2 months. And I think there's really something to be said for their experience. There is no coaching staff in the entire country that is better prepared for the 15-game schedule than Dabo Swinney and those Clemson assistants. There's something about just knowing how to take the pulse of your team, how to get them mentally ready. That is what happened last year in San Jose. Clemson was just more prepared than Alabama, and they just came out and thumped them. Now, I don't think Clemson is going to thump LSU by any means, but I think that that's what we saw against Ohio State when it came down to differences in the margins. Clemson had the advantage, and when we're talking about a razor-thin margin again between Clemson and LSU, I will take Clemson. And I think that, look, this is going to be 3 national championships in 4 years for Dabo Swinney. I think that we're looking with some real dynasty-type stuff here.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt it's a dynasty. And I'm with Chip. I'm taking the Clemson Tigers, too. I don't think the home field advantage inside the Mercedes-Benz Superdome is going to play a factor for LSU. And the reason is simple. Brent Venables is going to dial up something defensively. And yes, LSU's offensive line won the Joe Moore Award, but we saw Damian Lewis carted off the field in the Peach Bowl. We have seen that unit be a little leaky at times, especially early in this season. So do they have enough to hold this Clemson defensive front seven back? I don't think they do. So I think Joe Burrow's going to be hit consistently. I think that offensive line is going to be a little bit confused. And I think you're going to see Joe Burrow make a few mistakes, at least enough mistakes, to have his team hurt by his play. You're going to have Trevor Lawrence be calm, cool, collected, do what he does consistently. You're going to see Travis Etienne run the football effectively. You're going to see more of Trevor Lawrence on the ground. I think Clemson wins the national championship in an instant classic because defense wins championships, and right now, Clemson's defense is better than LSU's.
And if that happens, and both of you guys think it will, Clemson's going to win this game. That would be 3 out of 4. And then moving forward, going into 2020, are we looking at Clemson as head and shoulders the best college football program in the country moving into the next decade? Barrett, you lead us off.
Well, there's no doubt there's a dynasty. I mean, you can only have one ruling family, and right now Clemson is the ruling family. So they are the dynasty right now in college football if they win the national championship. As far as moving forward, I think you're going to see a different kind of landscape in the next decade because, yeah, Clemson's going to be there. I think Alabama will be there. Obviously, LSU has figured things out. Ohio State has the personnel, and I think they will be there. Clearly, they are on the brink. Georgia has the staff and has the bodies. So I don't think you're going to see this sort of Hatfields and McCoys like we saw with Alabama and Clemson towards the end of this decade. I think you're going to see a big group of teams, 5, 6, perhaps 7 teams, that are consistently in that discussion with, depending on the season, 2, 3, or perhaps even 4 of those teams being legit superpowers.
Right, and I think that one of my real keys in that question is head and shoulders, because Clemson is not head and shoulders in front of everybody else. I think that they are number one. I think they are the ruling family. And I think that as we go into the next decade, we're looking at Clemson will be at the top of the mountain, and they are going to have to defend it, not only against the likes of an Alabama, an LSU, or an Ohio State, but I would even draw it out as Georgia continues to strive to be able to have their opportunity, as Oklahoma continues to get to the college football playoff but not be able to take that next step. I don't think the circle is that much bigger than that, but I do think that Clemson is out in front, but they are going to have to defend their spot at the top of the mountain just the way Alabama did. And just like Alabama, it can be gone before you know it.
He's Chip Patterson. The other dude is Barrett Sallee. I'm Chris Hassel. We're just three guys who can't wait for Monday, January 13th. The Clemson Tigers, defending champs.
Bourbon Street, baby.
As underdogs on Bourbon Street against the #1 ranked LSU Tigers.